we're going to be doing real life lore. I really have enjoyed what I've seen of real life lore so far. We watched the video about why Russia wanted Ukraine, which I think was a very insightful video, and people seem to agree across the board that that video was incredibly thoughtful. And I have a lot of people that I follow who were recommending that video to people, so I just kind of had to, and I felt like it was really good. Real life lore, I don't know how they've escaped me this long, but they make some good stuff, clearly. So today we're going to be getting into a really interesting question. Why North Korea is the hardest country to escape? So, North Korea. Lovely place, of course. People try to leave there sometimes, and they run into some obstacles, apparently. I don't know... well, to be fair, information about North Korea is limited, with them being as isolationist as they are. But in general, I would say I'm not super duper well versed. I know some anecdotes from North Korea that are interesting, and a lot of what we know about them comes from anecdotes from people who have successfully escaped. So this is going to be a really interesting one. That process, a country that is so well isolated and so well locked down in a lot of ways. We poke a lot of fun at them, but there is something, and I don't mean this as a compliment, but there is something kind of impressive about how locked down their country is, how they manage to maintain the isolationism in such an interconnected world. So this, I think, should be interesting. So let's see if the sound is actually on. I want to make sure it's actually
This
playing.
video is made possible by
Yes, it
Curiosity
is.
Stream and Nebula. Watch another full-length companion video to this one in my
We're doing this at
modern progress series
1.15
that explains the
speed.
entire
You should
course
barely
of the
notice.
Korean conflict in the 21st century, which you can access by signing up for the Curiosity Stream Nebula bundle deal for only $15 a year at curiositystream.com/real-life-lore. There is simply no other country in the world today that can be even remotely compared with North Korea. Without any exaggeration, it is a literal 21st century glimpse into what Nazi Germany would have looked like had it survived after 1945. It is the world's most hardcore totalitarian regime, where absolutely
But not the Nazi Germany comparison is interesting. I can't tell him that he's wrong necessarily, because this is like what if stuff. I don't like Nazi Germany had global conquest ambitions. However, I think North Korea, I don't think they have ambition of conquest besides maybe reunifying the whole Korea, North and South Korea, but they're more of a sphere of influence thing. So I'm not sure where the comparison's appropriate necessarily, but incredibly authoritarian, regimented, like where nationalism, it doesn't really end from top to bottom. Like it kind of infiltrates all aspects of one's life. There you go. Okay, I that in that way, yeah, absolutely.
loyalty is always demanded, and where even the slightest sign of disloyalty to the country's absolute ruler can get you sent to one of the regime's numerous concentration camps for life, where you can expect a gruesome fate of starvation, literal slave labor, live medical
Do you want to see this? Their hands are tied behind their back. And it's like, and the bar is like pretty high off the ground, so you're like in a very compromising, uncomfortable situation there. Otherwise, it's a little hard to make out exactly why this is happening. I assume those are tears.
expect a gruesome fate of starvation, literal slave labor, live medical experiments, constant torture, and random execution depending on what the guards feel like doing to you. There is no such thing as due process or human rights in North Korea, and hundreds of thousands of people are existing right now within these camps, living out this hell every day. This isn't history. It's happening live right now as you're watching this video and listening to my voice. Obviously, if you were one of the ones trapped inside of this real-life nightmare, you would want to escape. The problem with that is that North Korea is without a doubt the world's most difficult country to escape from, primarily because North Korea doesn't allow you to escape. The penalty for even trying to leave the country is treason, the camps, and in many cases, death. And even if you successfully do get out, the North Korean regime has a tendency of going after your family members who stayed behind. This means your spouse, your children, your parents, and even your grandparents can be rounded up and sent to a lifetime of horror in one of the camps if they didn't make it out with you. For many, this is all the deterrent that's needed to keep them in line. Understandably, well, frustratingly so. But if you've made up your mind to leave, regardless of the risks and the consequences, these are the few ways you'd be able to do it. Unfortunately, none of them are easy, and they all have their own challenging geographic issues to account for. The most obvious destination for escape is to South Korea, the exact polar opposite of North Korea, a free, liberal, and rich democracy.
South Korea's development is just astonishing. It's one of the Asian countries that has really fit into this like very interconnected world where we kind of live these meshed together cultures that are kind of a result of free relations with other countries where they've absorbed so much Western culture that it's sort of hard to recognize them as an Asian country if you think maybe like 100 years ago. If you compare them to like 100 years ago, you wouldn't even imagine the Asian countries of the time being the way that South Korea and Japan, these are countries that are really big into importing Western culture. And we import a lot of their culture. Increasingly so from South Korea.
Korea claims legal authority over the entirety of the Korean peninsula and officially considers all 26 million North Korean citizens her own citizens as well. This means that if you can make it in, you're guaranteed citizenship, a future, and are effectively in the clear. But moving just this short distance from the north side of one peninsula to the south side is probably the most difficult journey that a human being can make in the 21st century. Walking directly across the southern border is almost impossible because it's literally the most heavily militarized location on the planet. It's completely covered with high walls, electric razor wire, millions of landmines, and is defended by millions of soldiers with live ammunition who have explicit orders to shoot to kill anyone foolish or brave enough to try getting across. An escape through here might be the quickest, but it's also the most dangerous and risky. Your odds of success are low, but despite that, many have still tried and come out victorious. In 2017,
so I'm curious. I don't know much about this. Do South Koreans encourage North Korean deserters? Do they gladly take them, or is there hostility on that side? This is not something I'm particularly familiar with, like how South Koreans would treat a North Korean coming through. Because it says that the soldiers have the orders to shoot, but I don't know if that just applies on the North Korean side. If they see like a North Korean coming in, would they accept them? I assume that will be covered.
A North Korean man drove his car directly up to the military demarcation line between the two countries at the border and dramatically crashed, got out, sprinted across the border under a hail of machine gun fire from the North Korean border guards, and collapsed on the South Korean side behind a wall before being rescued. He was shot 5 times.
Okay, he was
lost half
rescued.
his blood during the quick attempt, but he still managed to survive and now lives in the South. For most people, though,
nice.
Escaping directly into the south like this is simply too risky, so they'll take alternatives. While the southern border of North Korea is almost completely impenetrable to escape, the eastern and western sides are covered in ocean, which present their own challenges.
A little difficult.
And escaping with that is impossible since most North Koreans are severely impoverished, and there's no possible way to buy a boat anyway, even if you did have the money. For most people, that leaves simply swimming to South Korea, which carries the risks of drowning or getting caught by the North Korean patrol boats. In 2016, a man named Chul Yun Lee, who was a high-ranking member of North Korea's Japan's Ministry of State Security decided to defect with a friend using this method anyway. Together, they bought a motorbike tire, an air pump, and some food, and came to approximately this location in the west, just behind the DMZ. Once the sun had set, they plunged into the water and began swimming frantically and undetected. Unfortunately, the air pump ended up not working, and they had to abandon the tire and rely on their backpacks to help them stay afloat instead. They ended up swimming continuously for over 4 hours in the dark until they saw an unidentified boat moving towards their location.
Oh, no.
Fearful that it was a North Korean patrol, they frantically swam to this tiny island here and waited for the boat to leave. But this was during the cold autumn months in Korea, and they were wet with very few clothes. They managed to find some garbage they used to insulate themselves with, got some rest in, and when the sun came up, they found some wooden pallets that they tied together into a makeshift raft with some styrofoam and other trash, and they paddled back out to sea using their hands and floating with the tide. Fortunately for them, they hadn't realized that by this point, they were already well past the South Korean border, and South Korean ships quickly spotted them and came to their immediate rescue. They were successful, but
Hey, Jim.
many others haven't been.
Thanks for
most
joining
people,
us.
Getting to South Korea directly by running across the DMZ or swimming around it will result in death or capture. So that leaves getting to South Korea indirectly via another third country. There are 3 other countries nearby North Korea besides South Korea that you can escape towards, but none of them are good options. If you can make it, Japan is probably your best bet because you'll be guaranteed your freedom and sent to South Korea, but you have to make it across the Sea of Japan first, which
That's
can often be
perilous.
dangerous and is prone to typhoons, and in the best case scenario, you probably have nothing any better than a small boat. As a result, there have only been 3 confirmed successful cases of North Korean defectors actually making it directly to Japan. So it's probably going to be better to look north instead. Up here, the border is significantly less defended or patrolled and is
So we're going to be talking about China here. So what I do know is that China is an ally of North Korea in some capacity, and outside of North Korea being a nuclear power, their alliance with China is one of the few things that sort of keeps them afloat on the global stage. So I find that interesting, and you would think with them being allied that either this is where they'd be more comfortable having their people go, or there's like some sort of arrangement where it would be a great way to get people set back. I could only imagine China has a certain understanding of their policy. One would imagine.
terribly much easier to cross than the south, but doing so necessitates crossing into either China or Russia, neither of which are particularly very good options. The border with Russia is only 17 kilometers wide along the Tumen River.
I didn't even
and is
think of
easily
Russia.
Controlled by both sides. Even if you do make it across, Russia's official state policy is to immediately deport all North Korean refugees back into North Korea anyway. And as a North Korean,
Damn.
you're definitely going to stand out here. Hypothetically, you could make it up to the South Korean consulate in nearby Vladivostok and earn your freedom, but getting up there undetected by Russian police would be almost impossible, and as a result, escaping into China is the significantly more popular and less risky option.
Oh, really?
The border is open.
I find it interesting that it's safer to go to China than to Russia here, because I always think of like China being more friendly to North Korea. That's interesting.
1,300 kilometers long and follows the Yalu and Tumen rivers that flow through remote, mountainous, and rugged terrain. Patrols and border security through most of this area is light, and the best months to escape in are either during the summer, when the river's depths are at their lowest, or during the winter, when they're usually frozen, enabling
So before he continues, so they are relatively friendly. One thing that I wonder about China, and this is probably something that might get answered at some point in the future. Their relationship with North Korea seems like a common pattern of China using the fact that this country is isolated from the West to bring it under its wing. That's sort of a thing with China. It kind of looks at countries that are struggling with the West, and it uses the fact that it's isolated to pull it into its sphere of influence. So I don't know how much like China actually likes North Korea, but there is some convenience to the alliance. It is something like if you can protect it from the West that wants to depose their leader or whatever, then maybe there's some benefit that can come from having such a powerful country. And for its size, North Korea's military is apparently pretty impressive.
You to simply run across into China. It's relatively easy to get into China, but China can't be your new home forever. China isn't safe because just like Russia, China's policy is to immediately deport all North Korean defectors straight back to North Korea, where you'll almost assuredly face
same stuff.
a gruesome end. On the bright side, though, many of China's border provinces here, like Yanbian, have significant Korean ethnic minorities of their own who are naturalized Chinese citizens.
You could blend in.
It's fairly easy to hide out here for a while and avoid detection from the Chinese authorities while you plot your next move. If you decide to work with a foreign broker to assist in your escape, they can cost up to $18,000 for their services. An absolute fortune when you consider that the average North Korean earns just a measly $1,300 a year. That
$18,000. I've never had $18,000 in my bank account at any one time. I'm not a particularly wealthy person, but the fact that these people are expected to have that, well, they're not expected to have that. It's an extraordinary amount of money for an extraordinary task.
That is over 10 years of an average North Korean's pay. If you've got the means, a broker can be a good option, but if you don't, the next best option is to probably continue on to the city of Shenyang, where the closest South Korean consulate building in China is located. If you can make it up here and inside the building, you're probably gonna be safe. But it's also about 200 kilometers away from the North Korean border, and its perimeter is closely guarded by the Chinese police. If you're caught at any moment trying to get here, well, it's game over. In 2004, a group of 44 North Korean defectors managed to storm the Canadian embassy in Beijing all at once.
Canada.
Dressed up as construction workers to avoid any detection, they used ladders to scale the walls and successfully got into safety. But ever since then, China has significantly increased their police and security presence around foreign consulates and embassies, especially South Korean ones. So repeating this now would be a lot more challenging. Instead, you most likely need to get yourself across China and into another country that's more sympathetic to your situation. But the problem
That's
with
a
that
lot.
is that China is huge, and there aren't many countries around it who will even help you either.
I love this. I love that he turns and changes the way the map is oriented. A lot of places just don't do that. You just see like the north-south kind of alignment where it's just like north's on top, south's on bottom. But it's kind of interesting when he like turns the country and sees it from a different angle. It's just different. It's just a different way of doing things, and we should see places from different angles more often. It gives us a more full view of the world.
Russia will deport you back to North Korea if you get caught there, while Vietnam, Laos, and Myanmar all maintain close relations with Pyongyang as well, and just like China or Russia, they'll most likely deport you back to North Korea if they catch you as well. Getting into India, Bhutan, Nepal, or Pakistan would require hiking through the Himalayas, which pretty much eliminates any of them as
cannot
easy
do that.
options. And so that effectively leaves you only two friendly and realistic nearby destinations to
Sri
escape
Lanka.
to: Mongolia or Thailand. Mongolia is the
okay.
closer choice, and the government here is sympathetic to the plight of North Korean defectors. If you make it up here, they'll deport you to South Korea rather than the North upon arrival. You just have to surrender yourself to the Mongol police. The only problem is that to get here, one must pass through the formidably difficult, freezing, and hostile terrain of the Gobi Desert, one of the world's largest deserts with an abundance of dangerous wildlife, hostile temperatures, and few resources to survive on. Navigating through the desert takes a lot of skill that one is unlikely to have ever learned back in North Korea, but nevertheless, some people have made it. In 2007, Park Yeon-mi and her mother escaped across the northern border into China by running across the frozen Tumen River. Because of China's deportation policy, it was impossible for the pair to find any kind of legal work inside of China, and they fell victims to human traffickers. After months of living beneath the radar, they eventually made their way here to the city of Qingdao and found a Christian missionary shelter. It was there that after nearly 2 years of remaining undercover in China, that they received enough aid from missionaries and human rights activists to finally take a chance and flee up towards Mongolia, with the goal of getting deported to South Korea and freedom. This incredible mother-daughter pair successfully managed to navigate through the Gobi Desert and reached the Mongolia border, but upon arrival, a group of Mongolian Mongolian border guards intercepted them and threatened to deport them back over the border towards China, which would have ultimately meant deportation back to North Korea and the camps. Desperate, the pair both drew knives and promised that they'd kill themselves right there if that's what the guards were going to do. Sadly, death is often a preferable fate to a North Korean defector than being sent back to the country and the camps. Luckily for them, the guards took pity and brought them back in custody to the capital Ulaanbaatar before flying them directly to Seoul from there. Today, Yeonmi Park lives in New York City and runs a YouTube channel where
Oh, really?
directly to Seoul from there. Today, Yeonmi Park lives in New York.
Voice of North Korea by Youngmi Park. Okay. There we go. We're going to check that out at some point in the future. Oh, she was on Joe Rogan. Interessant.
New York City and runs a YouTube channel where she talks openly about her life and experiences growing up in North Korea. They are fascinating, and I highly recommend checking her channel out if you're curious about this kind of thing. So the link to her channel will be posted down below in the description. Navigating through the Gobi is so challenging for most, though, that the significant
Hey, Bird Mom? Hey, Bird Mom.
Huh?
Did Anthony Padilla, he talked to defectors from North Korea, right? One of them had like a YouTube channel, right? Didn't one of them? I don't know if you remember. I remember you watching that. I'm not sure if it's this person who talked to Anthony Padilla or not. I just wasn't sure if that was him who talked to them or if it was somebody else I watched. Okay, so I'm not sure. Anthony Padilla, the guy who was in Smosh. I don't need to tell you who Anthony Padilla is. He had a video where he talked to North Korean defectors, and for some, I wonder if this is one of them, because I recall one of them having a YouTube channel. But maybe it was her.
below in the description. Navigating through the Gobi is so challenging for most, though, that the significantly more popular route is to take a train or a bus undercover across China and attempt to escape into Thailand. These are the 5 closest train stations to the North Korean border within China that connect to China's vast high-speed rail network. If you hypothetically have the money and the skill to remain silent or undercover, you could board at any of these stations, exit at any of these near Mongolia and run across from there, or exit here at Kunming in China's Yunnan province and attempt to take a bus or run from there towards Thailand. There are plenty of buses that go from Kunming to other Southeast Asian countries, but the problem here is that even if you do somehow make it without getting caught by any of the authorities on a train or a bus, China and Thailand don't share a border, which means that you're going to have to get across the rugged and mountainous terrain of China's Yunnan province, and then get through the remote and dangerous jungles of Laos or Myanmar before finally crossing over the dangerous Mekong River in order to get to safety. In 2017, this is exactly what Park Hyun-woo and his father did. Before they decided to escape North Korea, both of Park's sisters had already made it to freedom in the south and were covertly sending money back to them up in the north. After securing the help of a broker in China, they decided that it was time for them to leave as well. In the dead of a winter night in February 2017, both men crossed the frozen Tumen River into China with a pill full of rat poison to kill themselves with if they got caught. One of the sisters
Always good to have a way out.
And took them to a nearby
Unfortunately.
safe house in the town of Yanji, where they changed clothes. From there, they took a train to Shenyang, and then another train to Zhengzhou, followed by yet another train to Beijing. From here, they took a series of buses to Kunming, but as soon as they got there, the Chinese authorities discovered them. Park and his father fled from their bus and became separated, and Park was forced to continue on foot alone through the dense jungles of Laos. Eventually reaching the Mekong River, the final obstacle, Park managed to get across and immediately surrendered himself to the Thai police, who took him into custody and surrendered him to South Korean officials, who flew him back to Seoul and safety. However, his father had been arrested by Chinese police and sent back to a prison near the North Korean border. But for whatever reason, the prison released him, and after getting back into contact with the brokers again, he made his way back down to Vietnam, and from here was able to avoid all detection and finally got on a plane bound for Seoul as well. It had taken him 1.5 years and a journey of over 5,000 miles simply to reach a place a mere 400 miles away from his home. These are the only ways to escape that are available to the average North Korean stranded within the country. And they are all
That's pretty sick
and desperate. But sometimes,
like it's not a cool situation, but it's like really rad that people, like, despite all the obstacles, have actually somehow managed to pull this off. on multiple occasions.
Getting to South Korea doesn't.
Like, you could make a movie out of any of these.
2002, a woman named Jin Kyung-suk successfully defected over to the South, became a citizen, and married a South Korean man. For their honeymoon in 2004, 2 years later, they decided to travel back to the Chinese-North Korean border to film a documentary on the horrors of the North Korean regime. But while there, unidentified men kidnapped Jin and dragged her back into North Korea, where she was sent back to a concentration camp, tortured, and eventually executed, despite having been a legal South Korean resident. Escaping from North Korea is never easy for anyone. All of these options are difficult, and even if you do make it out...
Is the one on the left Kim Il-sung and the one on the right Kim Jong-un? I mean, Il? It's hard to tell. It looks like they use this very... And the fact that they wear the same glasses, like... I can't tell if they're supposed to be different people or not.
You can still very easily be dragged back against
the hair is
will
different
and killed. There are countless other stories of heroic people who've defied the odds and escaped through various means. And what makes North Korea so fascinating to many of us outside of it is that it isn't history. You read the horrible accounts of survivors and hear their stories and realize that you're not listening to something from 1940, but something that could have happened yesterday. The Cold War may have ended everywhere else in the world in 1991, but it never ended in Korea. And if anything, it's
a way of
worse
looking
now
at
than
it.
it's ever been before. The modern Cold War in Korea is an incredibly complex and controversial story to tell, with countless other escape attempts that are too graphic to cover on YouTube. The development of nuclear bombs, millions of people who believe that Kim Jong-un is a literal god, missiles that can now strike at the heart of the United States mainland, the largest arsenal of chemical weapons the world...
Yeah, the cult of personality around the Kim family. I've heard plenty of people argue that it's basically a theocracy, which interesting way of looking at it.
World has ever seen, and the fate of tens of millions of people all hanging in the balance. It is without a doubt one of the most fascinating, violent, and controversial conflicts of both the 20th and 21st centuries, and unfortunately, not acceptable for me to cover in detail on YouTube due to their terms of service. I know how making videos on YouTube works, and I know that this video already has...
Okay, so this is a Nebula ad. I am going to let it play out, but I'm doing it at 1.75 speed. That's our compromise.
An incredibly high chance of being demonetized and unpromoted by YouTube's algorithm because of the content I'm discussing. But the moment I really start diving into the whole history of the 21st century conflict between North Korea and South Korea and the United States, what's all at stake, why it all began, how it's been fought, and how it all led to where we are today, it's a guarantee that this video will be censored and you won't get to see it. So instead, I created another full-length companion video in my ongoing Modern Conflict series that's the same length as this video, with all of that controversial but fascinating information included, and uploaded it to Nebula, which, as you've probably heard by now, is home to tons of exclusive ad-free content, like my entire Modern Conflict series, with 5 other additional full-length videos you can go watch right now, detailing the Israel-Palestine conflicts, the war in Afghanistan, the 2020 Armenia-Azerbaijan war, and the ongoing Russo-Ukraine war in the Donbass. Of course, the reason why all of these videos are only on Nebula is because the YouTube algorithm actually punishes me and all other creators for ever trying anything new or controversial. But Nebula is a different platform without an algorithm and without ads. It's just a platform about great and unique content made by great and independent educational creators. Nebula's ecosystem enables us to take big risks with expensive projects like America's biggest ghost town, my own 35-minute
that sounds interesting.
on location around the Salton Sea, the largest lake in California, and arguably America's greatest environmental catastrophe that drove thousands of Americans from their homes and as a result created America's largest ghost town. And plenty more projects from other creators you know, like Whenever Productions, Have Is Interesting, Tom Scott, and many others. The best way to get access to Nebula and all of this incredible content is definitely through the amazing CuriosityStream Nebula bundle deal. With its current sales price, it's less than $15 a year to get access to both sites. And CuriosityStream has some phenomenal stuff too, like the series Dynasties, The Families That Changed the World, which includes a fantastic 15-minute long episode that dives deep into the Kim dynasty of North Korea and how they rose from relative obscurity to dominating the world's most totalitarian state. I really can't recommend this documentary enough, and I genuinely don't
know might be worth it.
Exists anywhere in streaming. You get 2 streaming sites, both with content you'll actually watch, and all for less than $15 a year at the current sales price. But what's more, signing up will actually help countless independent educational creators beyond just real life lore. So please make sure to do so by clicking this button that's here on your screen right now, which will take...
All right, there is your promo code if you are interested in all that. The option is there. I'm going to go back to probably like a 1 point. We'll do a 1.2 probably, right? And then that seems like fast enough that it's slightly more productive, but not too fast that it's noticeably way faster than it would normally be, you know? So that was fun, and maybe we'll check out some stuff from that that lady whose channel I screenshotted a second ago. I screenshotted it because I knew I would forget her name. Maybe we'll check out some of her stuff if we return to talking about North Korea, which inevitably we will. It's such an interesting subject that it's definitely worth getting back to at some point.